Thank you very much. I'm not going to go up there, I'm staying here, because this machine, I'm talking about the use of science in our daily lives, but I'm not using it. Last time I was in this theatre, I was to have a presentation, or listen to a presentation on the finding of the Sydney, and the electronics didn't work. So I brought my dinosaur with me, and I rely on my dinosaur. I have reminded people in the past that humans, Homo sapiens or Homo erectus, has been around for about 2 million years. The dinosaurs ruled the world for 60, at least, million years, more like 200 million years. Humans got a long way to go to catch up with the dinosaurs, so I'll stick with my dinosaurs. The reason I'm giving this lecture, and if any of you are expecting me to talk about science in your lives, forget it, I'm not going to. That was just to sucker you in. What happened was last year we gave a lot of lectures and there were a lot of questions came back from the audience. And it came as a nasty shock to me that my arrogance was such that I believed people knew what I was talking about. They didn't. They didn't know what I was talking about. Well, sorry, that's not fair. They liked the lecture, yeah, but they didn't know how I'd got to that point, how I'd achieved, how I'd done what I did. So I thought about it and I thought, well, really the way I do it is by taking the raw science that we produce from so many areas and turning it into pragmatic, practical answers to problems. That's what I do, that's my job. And then applying it to industry, to government, to social situations, anywhere. So let me go back to my written script and see why is that picture up there? Well, this, of course, is the world. This is my last holiday on the moon and I took a photograph. That's the moon in the foreground, yes, it genuinely is. And that was Barrow Island down there. This is taken for a lecture on Barrow Island. But the point is that is the only life in the known universe. That biosphere is the only life in the entire known universe. And that's a pretty mighty thing. It's either a nasty infection and all the other planets are clean and all the other suns are clean, or it is a remarkable thing. I know scientists have argued that there are billions of stars out there and they have multi-billions of planets and they must have intelligent life. There's no must about it. We've got no evidence. Perhaps they're too intelligent to talk to us, but that's another thing to see. We share that with all living things in the universe, plants and animals. And they use the same air, the same land, the same water that we use. Once we lose them, that delicate balance that keeps us alive disappears. So the environment is now defined by government as the total surround of humanity. The physical environment, the biological environment, and the social environment. Put those three things together, and that is our biosphere. Physical environment is something that's pretty straightforward, and that's a bit of physical environment. A chunk of rock, that particular rock is around about 80 million years old, and it's a relic from a sea that occurred 80 million years ago. There's fossils in it, there was life there then, but not much. And the biological is there by the spinifex grass around it, and the social is there by the wheel tracks that are put through to this site. So there's the three things in one picture. It's pretty straightforward what's physical. What's biological is also pretty straightforward. Whoops, wrong way. Come back this way. One of the trouble with dinosaurs, they tend to go backward. This is my garden at Butler, and these are some of my biological friends who regard the changed environment of my garden as a very desirable habitat. We have a problem with kangaroos, as you can see. These are not pets, these live in the forest. And we are told on good authority that at the time of the coming of the white man, there were probably something like 70 million kangaroos in Australia, and today there's something like 170 million kangaroos in Australia, some figure like that. Mainly because we have modified the environment and changed it to the advantage of some animals. Kangaroos are some that are very much advantaged. So that's pretty straightforward, but less straightforward is the social environment. And this is a social environment West Australians know and love. Our sense of humour is displayed here with the broad arrows put by the convicts on the town hall and the rope of the hangman's rope underneath the windows. Our convict ancestors had a pretty good sense of humour and some of those things. But they're the things. The social aspect of life is not just buildings, it's the environment of humans. It's not only their hard things like this, it's their hopes and aspirations, and it's their future and well. So what I'm talking about is the functional presentation of some of our science. It's a matter of record that about 400 years ago, people like yourselves, ordinary people, and you're ordinary people like all of us, didn't differentiate between science and magic. Science was magic. Most of you think it's magic, you turn a switch on, the light goes on, that's magic. But in those days, chemistry and alchemy, the same thing. Magic and medicine, same thing. And astrology and astronomy, same thing. There was no barrier, no barrier. Individuals like Francis Bacon and René Descartes started the first steps to scientific method, and that was to test a hypothesis by evidence, to open that test to peer and public review, and have a willingness to either abandon the hypotheses or change it according to the input that came from other people. That beginning, 400 years ago, transformed the world to today, mostly for the good, excepting where scientific advance is crippled by belief or by misapplication. Now, to illustrate that a bit more strongly, in 2006, it was proudly announced, yes, no, no. So we're not going to compete with Mary, I'll stop. 2006, there was discovery of a new galaxy, 13 billion light years away. And that is fundamental science. What possible use is that? What can we do with that? But it's a fascinating piece of scientific discovery. It's getting close to the Big Bang, the thing that started everything. It's helping us to understand. But also, in 2006, a national poll in America, and I'm quoting exact, that's why I'm looking down here, showed that the majority of Americans believe the Earth was created in 6 days, and that Noah and his family, accompanied by pairs of all the world's species of animals, got on an ark and survived the flood. Now there, in the same year, we have two totally different examples, one of belief, one of science. And if you think that's a bit strange, how many of you read horoscopes in the firm belief that the world or the universe surrounding us is peopled by supernatural beings who have nothing better than do to control the life of humans through horoscopes? Think about it. Yeah, I know. Now, the West Australian Museum Science has no boundaries. Well, it does. It has time and it has funding, particularly funding. And for example, we have things like the physical sciences involve like geology, astronomy, chemistry,
This is the Wolf Creek meteorite crater. Once again, there's the human impact coming in to it. We have biological environments, and this is a piece of coral reef which is about to be destroyed by the relentless process of fishing. In this particular case, fishing with explosives. And of course, we have social environment. Social environment through anthropology, history and religion, all are part of the museum scientific charter, part of the charter of bringing those things to the, preserving them from the past and preserving them into the future. They're all there, they're included in this wide series of the Wild West lectures. But my work for the last 50 or more years has been aimed at establishing guidelines and practices with particular reference to developers in the petroleum and mining industries, although not restricted to them. And that means using the scientific knowledge available and the technologies that derive from that knowledge in order to protect and conserve the alternate values of developed areas. And that's a nice mouthful, and it's the way we work. The issues are pretty magnificent. The first issue that faces us all in any of these things is what I call, whoops, what happened? I've lost a slide somewhere. Go back, back, I said, not forward. That's it. Yeah, all right. So what we've got to do is accept that you can have conservation and development at the same time. That's the first thing. If you can accept that, then there's some things you've got to do. You've got to recognise and preserve the limited or irreplaceable segments of the environment. Here is a mine which has been rehabilitated here, and so then they discovered there was Aboriginal material here, so immediately we shut down signposts and closed off. In other words, it's irreplaceable. That material can't be replaced. You can't pick it up and put it somewhere else. You can't rebuild it. It's there for. So that was just one example. The second thing you need to do is to preserve pieces of all the original habitats. And here you see a block of, this is a tin mine, and the land's been cleared for the mine, but the bushland is intact around it. Now this is quite a simple, small operation. It's not a big company like BHP or Chevron or something like that. It's a very small operator. But the guy was willing to come to the party on what we were doing. Third, we systematically rehabilitate. This is perhaps the best example I have. This is in New South Wales, and the coal mine starts here, and it's worked its way around the face, and is currently there, and this is all the mine being developed along here. And as it's finished, it's being rehabilitated. So that there's 30 years work in that part. Now 30 years ago, no one was interested in rehabilitation. Most of that rehabilitation has taken place in the last 20 years. But they have made the change, and that's the important thing. You systematically rehabilitate, I mentioned that. You exclude unnecessary impacts. This is in the early days of Chevron on Barrow Island, and everyone had quite simple instructions, clear, unequivocal, and if you broke them, you didn't have a job. It was that simple. So we got it fixed up. And finally, you minimise those impacts which can't. Sometimes you've got to close right down, and will lead to dismissal. No bones. Just if you don't do it, it's out. There's no 3 strikes, there's no protesting to the umpire. If you get it wrong, you're out. They sound very simple, but the problems of our society are immense. I mentioned what I call the straight line syndrome. Governments and land managers love straight lines. They love putting lines on maps. And so when you come through to put a line on a map, this is a pipeline coming through, you're going to cut across someone's paddock, you're going to cut
along his fence if you can. You're going to go through the middle of reserve because you can't just bend the pipeline. So you've got to do the best you can. And these pay no attention, these straight boundaries pay no attention to drainage lines and things like that. So one farmer can be very carefully husbanding his land, and the fellow upstream from him can be cutting it down to salt. And the salt is now flowing down onto the land below him. There's no overall management. So that's one problem, straight line boundaries. Fauna disturbance is another one. And fauna disturbance is quite often accompanied by the introduction of animals that we don't particularly want. Are you able to see there?
No, fine. I just don't like redbacks.
Oh, God, I thought it was me. Oh, that's a relief. Believe me, that is a relief. The redback is a native animal, but once we disturb the environment, this is one of the early colonisers, and we get far more impact from redbacks. When you go home tonight or tomorrow morning, when you go out watering your garden, lift up a couple of your pot plants and see how many redbacks you've got. Lift up your patio chairs and see how many redbacks are underneath them. Yes, they're all through, but people say, oh, redbacks. Oh, sorry, ma'am. Okay. Then there's soil disturbance. And here you can see the impact of a mine. The mine's going down, and this I might say is one of the better mines. These are all the tailings out here, little workshops, access roads, tailing dumps, and water conservation inside, so we're using the water there. And these are rehabilitated slopes around the mine, and these are rehabilitated slopes around the mine. So that's just here in the hills. That's Gosnells, ready mix quarry at Gosnells. They were very early off the mark and to getting it right. But soil disturbance is very real. The loss of plant cover. In order to do anything, you clear the plants off. If you take away the plants, where's the food for the animals? Where's the cover for the animals? They're gone. Light, phototrophic species. Dust. Too much dust, you get dead plants. And that's a classic example of too much dust. Alongside roads with haul trucks running and killing it. Surface change runoffs. Erosion, just because we changed a river drainage by putting a bridge over it. And that changed the drainage and that caused a washout. And so that's what we end up. Look at the fantastic root structure on that plant. Some of the roots going out on the surface for winter time and other roots going down into the ground for summertime, tapping both levels. Human predation. And wherever you go, I find this. People chopping down trees to get birds' nests, or to get possums, or to get goannas, or to get honey. But they cut the tree down in order to do it. Food availability changes. This is a place just up here on the coastal plain, and it was a site that was cleared for drilling. The hole was dry, but the regeneration, although it's there, is a different suite of plants to what's behind for about 10, 15 years. And so for that period of time, we have this slightly different habitat that's there. And that changes. That new vegetation is richer in nitrogen and water than the scrub behind, and that's why all the kangaroos come into my garden. That's the same reason. Ecosystem changes due to selective use. Now this is a quarry in Brisbane, and we put a gasometer in it because it's the best place to do it. By getting it in there, we fill the quarry up, but the animals that lived in the quarry, or where the quarry was originally, have gone. They're not there anymore. So that's gone. So these are all things that happen. Barriers created by roads and things. Now, you might not understand this, but look, the water's flowing this way. Water's flowing out there. So it comes down, hits this new road, and straight away banks up. And so you've got a rain shadow on the down road side. And that doesn't look much, but to a pastoralist, that's pretty important. It makes a significant difference. And when you change, if you change those drainages on flat Australia, Western Australia, it's very critical that we maintain equal running. And of course, climatic conditions are always with us. And this year we're really seeing climatic conditions here in Australia. I've just come down from Barrow and sounds promising. Wasn't me, I swear. It hasn't got there yet. Climatic conditions of drought, flood and flooding rains. Dorothea McKellar said it beautifully, and that's the sort of thing we've got in the Pilbara. A storm like that will drop 110 millimetres of rain on Warburton and nothing 10 mile away. That's the way it is, right through the main bulk of Western Australia. It's an Aryan landscape and it doesn't have regular seasons like we normally enjoy down here. They're actual problems. Each one of those is an actual problem. But then you've got the potential problems too. You've got the problems of introduced species. And I'm not talking about rabbits because they're easy. But this is introduced cow. And where the cow has been, there's introduced weeds and fertiliser. So the weeds are self-fertilised by what the cow's been grazing on. That is in the national park. And bingo, we've got introduced plants and animals moving in. Road casualties. Anywhere there's a road, there's a casualty. I picked a frog because no one cares about frogs. Everyone cares about furry animals. You care about frogs, yes. I care about frogs too. That was Kato. The spills or other accidents. Now, these are dead plants because of a spill that took place and the tidal influx carried the spill in. So, an accident that happened. Accidents, sometimes they happen. No matter how careful you are, someone makes a boo-boo. This guy had a reason. You'll notice his windscreen is smashed because he hit a sea eagle coming into land and in the resulting excitement didn't put his wheels down. And, so he landed on the skid like that. Now that is an accident. Now what happens, this is on Barrow Island, and what happens when you have an accident, all of the prevailing human endeavour jumps into action and all the emergency services rush in and all quarantine, everything else is ignored. And that's when our problems break out. So we have a real problem with saving human life and maintaining standards. It's a very big problem. Waste disposal is another one. We can get some pretty nasty things like that, but the bloke said, oh, that's all right, we'll cover it up with dirt, should be right. And yeah, it is, because it's all inert, I have to say. It's all inert material, it's steel, and there she goes. We'll pause for a minute. Looks good, doesn't it? I'm glad it's not me though. Now, allied to waste is pollution levels of all sorts. And pollution can take place from heat, from smoke, from CO2, from noxious gases, a whole range of pollutions. It can take place in water, it can take place in air, it can take place on the land, and there's all sorts of things. Now I've just spent 10 minutes talking about problems and I've only just touched. I mean, there are many, many more problems than those, but there are a few of them. Our methods of management vary quite considerably, but the first understanding is that conservation is compatible development with proper management. Those three words are often neglected. With proper management. And what consists proper management, I'll come to. But whatever it is, it's got to be clearly detailed so it's understood by everybody involved, not just the workforce in the field, but it's got to be the boardroom, it's got to be the tea lady, it's got to be the consultants, the contractors. Everyone has to be involved as stakeholders, and so they have to understand what we're doing. That requires a program of induction education which is aimed at everybody, workers, visitors, and also the wider community. Outreaching into the wider community is an important part of what we do in making this sensible. There must be penalties as well as rewards.
Now, some of the specific answers might interest some of you. Disturbance to fauna was modified by dividing the area up into big sections and developing one section. And then this section had its rehabilitation carried out. That's rehabilitated, that's rehabilitated, that's rehabilitated there, and that bit there, that's an active well, that's an active well, that's rehabilitated there. Now that whole development took about 3 years. In the meantime, the animals that were displaced from there could go into there and find stabilise, come into this block and stabilise, that block and stabilise, that block and stabilise. Next year we'll jump up to that block up there. And so there's always, by the time we've modified in this one, this block will be rehabilitated to the point where the animals can move back into it. So it's that staggered or alternating areas of development so that no one area has a constant impact. Soil disturbance is continually operated on by rehabilitation, and here you see it in stages. A railway line down there, that's rehabilitation that's about 5 years old, and that's about 3 years old. That block in there is about a year old. This block is just starting. You see they're selling and making the depth to stop any. In the early days they didn't do that, and what happened was you got the pavement, and when the wind blew, all the revegetation just rolled up like carpet in the wind. And so that's what we're doing there now. That's one of the techniques. Cover removal was we used artificial shelters, but we woke up to what it was. Animals, when they lost the cover, as long as there was solid shade, they didn't mind. So every bit of solid shade had an animal living in it. And where there was a power pole that wide, a young animal would go to the power pole, and as the sun moved during the day, the animal would move around using the shade. And by looking at that, we realised it's a shade they want, solid shade. And so we put up solid shades until the rehab comes up. Made them out of brush, wood, so that they would collapse by termites and things like that. We had quarantine, was very important, species introduction. And because on Barrow Island, for example, we only had barges and airplanes, we could quarantine much more readily than we could on the mainland. But I spoke about Barrow Island last time, so I'm not going to go over it again. Road casualties, we enforced speed limits, reduced night driving, we reduced lights in size and restricted to certain wavelengths, which did not negatively affect turtles. Toxic and noxious spills were prevented by particular access or containment, even though there was no spill. In other words, you don't wait for a spill. You take action before it happens. Crystal ball gazing. There could be a spill, there is a risk, therefore, so risk management became a very critical part of all of our operations. Then you had to have these special gurus who could tell you how much risk there was. Believe me, they made a lot of money because everything was risky. Well, think about it. Where's the most accidents in the ordinary West Australian household? In the bathroom. In the bathroom, yeah. Most people die in the bathroom. Don't go in the bathroom. Okay. Now, one of the big problems was dust. And what happens with dust is interesting. It's far more complex than people think. With a dirt road, like you see here, a prevailing wind blows across and the windrows as the road is graded, and so we get a raised piece of dirt which traps water and acts as an infiltration bank. And at the same time, the dust covers the vegetation and coats it so that it becomes unpalatable for the animals to eat. So the road is less attractive. Now that's not true where the road is bitumen, because there's no dust. And so for those who travel up to Karratha or up to Kalgoorlie on the bitumen, after a heavy rainstorm, you'll find dead kangaroos all along the roads. Or go across the Nullarbor. Where it's bitumen, there's no dust. But you go on the bush tracks, or the tracks like that, and you find nowhere near as many dead animals, simply because the dust makes the vegetation unpalatable. And when it rains, what happens? the dust goes down onto the dead vegetation, forms a mulch, a nutrient, and you get better growth. And look at the difference in growth on the sides of the road compared to out here in the main bush. It's quite significantly different. Engineering we worked on for dams, and usually where we could, we made the dams into functional dams. This is the Ord Dam. It was originally put in to provide water for industry, for agriculture, but we put hydropower into it too, so hydroelectric power, tourism, recreation, fish farming, crocodile farming, all of those things take place in there, but at the same time the original values of heritage, of colonial heritage as well as Aboriginal heritage and water use were all preserved and protected. We learned a lot of lessons from Egypt in that particular instance. Human predation was banned. Simply we banned taking fauna and flora, or we used strict laws. Food availability and ecosystem change was modified by this sort of thing. I'm going to say, oh yeah, that's your rehabilitation. Yeah, look at it. Okay, move on. 10 years. Okay? Point is, when you start rehabilitation, it's going to look different because it is different. You have colonising plants because you've disturbed the soil. They come to fulfilment. Then you get secondary plants. They come to, and then, and only then, do you get your third tier of plants, which are usually your climax plants. So you can have instant restoration in a wheat field. I mean, you can clear a wheat field and then you can fertilise it and seed it and you've got wheat straight away. You can get it, but for natural bush, and that is natural bush, spinifex bush, it takes about 10 years to bring it back. But look at the seed load on it. Yeah, think of all the lovies who like that. Now, this is perhaps one of the most important aspects in that our regrowth does not exceed the regrowth in these areas over here, which are natural, they haven't been touched. Each ecosystem and its components has evolved to survive a whole range of natural catastrophes, storms and fires and droughts, climatic changes and so on. The ones that didn't survive didn't have any kids. So all the living things in the environment today are things that have evolved against everything that nature's been able to throw at it over the last 10 million years or whatever length of time. And as long as we can restrict the impact of our project to within the limit of that natural impact, we don't have a real problem. Because if we can keep the bones and sinews of the earth, we are able to maintain the things. But it does mean that you have to involve education, environmental engineering and economic issues in the planning. You can't just have one group running it. If you let engineers run it, it won't work. If you let educators run it, it won't work. If you let economists run it, it definitely won't work. I won't go into lawyers, I won't start on that. Climatic conditions, well, meteorological data is generally available, but we go a long way further. We look at things like ambient dust and ambient noise, light, salt, all of those things. That's the gathering of information. And that information, once it's gathered, then makes a decision as to how we build the plant. Now here's the mine, and this is a bund created because this is an area where the sound is travelling down the valley. And so that's an acoustic bund that means that the mine is okay. And it's interesting in this picture, that is an old road running through there. It's been rehabilitated, but see what happens when in this plain country when you rip the roads and the vegetation comes up because you've changed the nitrogen and moisture content of the soil. There are many more answers, but the answer I'm trying to tell you is I use a holistic approach. Looks at the entire system, its resources, the effect of the project on the environment and the effect of the environment on the project. It's a two-way street. And most of our consultants, and I know there are some in the audience tonight, have only looked in their reports at the effect of the
project on the environment, because that's what the government wants. But we have to look at the other side of it too. What is the effect of the environment on the project? And here we've just seen Queen Mary go. The effect of the Queen Mary on the ocean environment is probably pretty low. But there's bilge water going out, there's wastewater going out, there's water take-up and things like that, and there's CO2 coming off. And against that, what's the impact of the environment on the Queen Mary? Storms, salt, boredom, all those things. Okay, to reach intelligent understanding of the project and its environment, you need scientists. And they're technicians, and you often need, on a big project, hundreds of them. They all come together, or perhaps they don't, but they all work to provide physical, biological and social baselines. And geology, hydrology, anthropology, biology, history, legal requirement, whole range of disciplines are involved. And they combine to form what is called an EIS, ERMP, Environmental Impact Statement, or Environment Review and Management Plan. And that comes up with an environmental management plan. That plan is presented to the government as a draft, and the government in turn presents it to the public for comment. And based on the draft and the inputs from the public and from the government departments, we come back to possibly an approved plan, initial plan of management. And I want to make this clear. That plan of management is not cast in concrete. That plan of management is as flexible as the environment is flexible. It's dynamic and it changes. Anyone who wrote a plan of management for Brisbane must be kicking themselves to death after the floods we've just had. Despite the fact that they had a flood just before, 20 years ago, they did not learn the lesson. And they kept channeling the river into more and more and narrower runoff. It couldn't possibly get away with the one. And they're saying, but it's a 1 in 150 year flood. Okay, we have a flood like that once every 150 years. You've got to plan for it. It's no good saying, but you don't know when in the 150 years it's going to come. That's the point. That's the critical bit. Unfortunately, we have ignorant people, we have apathetic people, and we have lazy people who prefer to have checklists that they can tick and say, hey, I've ticked all the boxes, there's no problems. And so many of the failures we have in industry are a direct result of those people. Our plans include monitoring, and this is very important. People get out and look at everything we've said is going to happen. We've made our prediction. We've had our crystal ball and we've said, as far as we know, this is going to happen. Now we're going to send people out to make sure it either happens or it has happened or it hasn't happened. And then we adjust accordingly. And then we can detect and mitigate macro and micro changes, and we can ensure that agreed conditions are met. Now, government is very much involved, and much of what I'm talking about tonight is already embodied as minimal requirements in new projects in Australia and in many other parts of the world. Alec was kind enough to mention that I am known in other parts of the world, and it's not because of TV programs, it's because of this sort of work. And it works very well, and governments are very keen. I have research grants and studies involved. Oh, see, there you go, you weren't paying attention. You weren't paying attention. No, you weren't paying attention.
Sorry.
I say, I've got this marvellous assistant here. What happens?
Sleeping on the job, Harry.
Sleeping on the job. There, look at that. That one's not going to go through. It went through in the practice, I promise you.
So you shouldn't let me.
That'll do. Now, this is a research grant. Again, this is on Barrow Island, and the government said, you're killing all the mutton birds. There are no mutton birds on Barrow Island. There are mutton birds on all the islands around Barrow Island, but Barrow Island is populated by a full suite of things like parentes and bandicoots that eat mutton birds. So there's no mutton birds on Barrow. But we set up a research grant and we worked out there. And here we are checking the mutton birds out,
and finding out how many chicks they've got and what they're doing and whether they go back to the same missus every year or not, which they do, and except they get a divorce about once every 10 years. So there's research grants and studies, and quite a lot of those. And I think I might have said that my oldest example was Barrow Island. I began work there in 1964, and 47 years later, it can truthfully be said there are no discernible changes in plant associations, in ecosystems, or in faunal population structures outside the normal dynamics, ups and downs of cyclones and droughts and fires and so on. But there are no known losses of species or biota. So Western Australia is a biodiversity hotspot, but we have a red hotspot on Barrow, the biodiversity that's there. But I'm not going to go into that because I talked about that last year. During the time, though, of that 48 years, 47, 48 years, over 100,000 visitors and workforce have come to Barrow Island. And they come through the airport. It's the only way they can come in. They don't come by barge. They come on the airport and they're checked, quarantined, and the whole program is locked into saying, this is a precious place. You are here under sufferance. It's a privilege to come to Barrow Island. Even to work here, it's a privilege to come here. And if you break the rules, you're out. And even more so, if you're a contractor and one of your staff breaks the rules, the staff person is out, but as the contractor, you have one strike against you. If somebody else in your organisation breaks the rules, he's out, you've got 2 strikes against you. The third person breaks it, your contract is now null and void. And quite recently, we knocked out a very large contract to a very large local company simply because they did not believe the rules applied to them. They didn't believe it. They could not believe, because in Western Australia, those sort of conditions don't apply as rigidly as they do on Barrow Island. The international people are very, yes sir, they're right onto it. Okay. Proper management is assessing full site information and involving plans of management and plans of contingency. The basis of conservation is the preservation of habitat, which is water, soil and native vegetation, air and all the processes which operate the ecosystems. We don't regard species protection as terribly important because if you can save the habitat, then the species will probably save themselves, as long as you don't have invaders. What you've got here is an example of a mistake. Here you've got changed soil down a pipeline, bringing in dirt to get up through the rocks and not damage the pipe, and see the different vegetation growing on that. But that'll change. That vegetation, incidentally, does occur naturally on the valleys down here, but now we've got a corridor of it running through. If you keep that, you've got thousands of generations of natural selection can adopt to this short-term intrusion. But if those intrusions are not actively and professionally managed, then they can result in extinction. And it's quite as simple as that. And it's forever. A good example on Barrow, we have the last booties. Well, we had the last booties. We've now farmed them out onto preserved areas, and no longer are they restricted to Barrow Island. And yet once they lived right across dry country Australia. Today they don't. Well, we're going to get them back though. It's coming. Some management includes overall biodiversity protection, but we do have some special activities. And for example, everyone has a big thing about turtles, so we have a special thing about turtles. We involve our workforce. They go out. We have professional turtle taggers who interact with the workforce to go out nightly and daily, count the number of turtles that come up on the beach, and you can see it's a job because it's not just these are turtles, these black spots in the water are all turtles too. There's 120,000 a year coming on that beach on Barrow Island. And it's a lot of turtles, the biggest population of green turtles in the world, despite what Queensland might tell you. Now, why do I do all this? Why? First of all, because I like natural history, sure. But the main reason is because without the development and use of resources, our standard of living is reduced and our quality of life will suffer immensely. The community, because of that, becomes hungry and ignorant, and hungry and ignorant people have no environmental conscience at all. It just doesn't exist. Reduction of impacts is 7 tried and tested principles. The first one is every human action interfaces with the environment in some way and can either positively or negatively affect the welfare, health and safety of the wider community. And that can be catastrophic or it can be chronic cumulative. But whatever we do affects the environment. The massive increase in the use of world resources through population increase over the past few decades, and I use that advisedly. It's no secret I'm 80, and my father, when I was 6, took great delight in telling me, son, the world population has reached 2 billion people. I'm now 80 and the world population is pushing 8 billion people. And that's only a few decades. Now the massive use of human need for resources requires the development of resources. But if we develop them the wrong way, we wipe out everything. We don't just wipe out those things. So we need land care policies and land care essential before the development takes place. The third point is that the Earth's resources are finite. Even those resources which are self-renewing, like timber, water and so on, they're finite. And relationships between the components of the natural environmental systems are dynamic, but they're in balance. So once humans break that balance pattern, that's when the disasters occur. If we can have sustainable utilisation, we're fine. Without it, we have degradation. And inhuman utilisation based on political and social criteria, the utilisation of Earth's resources is primarily about humans. We care about people first. It's a problem. The manner in which this generation manages the Earth today decides the future for everyone, your children, your grandchildren, and all the generations yet to come. You cannot go back. We can only go forward. The maintenance of the environment therefore requires positive action at all levels. It is not the sole responsibility of DEC or EPA or someone like that. Everyone is responsible for the care of the environment. And prevention of negative effects is more effective and efficient than remedial action on effects which have already damaged the environment. You can't go back. Once the stuff is gone, you can't put it back, no matter how hard you try. If a thing's extinct, you can't make it unextinct. And finally, recognise the difference between science, which is based on fact, and opinion, which is based on emotion. All people have emotion, no question, because emotion comes from the heart, and everyone has a heart. Science and rational debate come from the mind. I'm not sure that you can say that everyone has a mind that they use. So think about that one. From these general principles, there are 4 action areas. Protect and conserve the environment. Promote positive, rational, balanced debate through education of workforce, community and the next generation. Base it on fact, but don't forget emotion, because emotion is the prime driver of humanity, and we have to utilise it and make use of it. User pays concept, and because we're all users, we should all pay. We need to look at the way we live and what we consume and do something about it. Because I've got some lovely armchair greenie mates who sit in the comfort of the air-conditioned room with three air conditioners running, showers running, and wingo, they're in business. But it's not easy to bear the inconvenience and expense that being a conservationist quite often exists. Quite often you don't get paid, for example. No, they're not listening.
Just making sure. And finally, look to science and to technology for answers. As we have seen in the last few months, nature is still dominating humanity. And the only way we can overcome that is to look to technology to overcome such problems and move to the future, not to the past. We've heard our beloved leader talking about moving forward to the future. Well, I think she's one of the people who wants to live in the cave in the dark eating grass seeds, but not many people would choose to do that. The environment is something we use, but we hold in trust for future generations, and the future's in our hands, and the keys are ours to use as we choose, this generation. But we can't afford short-term propositions which mortgage the future. And we must recognise that the world's population demands and expects the standard of living that we have. Only a few privileged people, like Australians, live as well as we do. There are not many places in the world live as well as we do. Science and its offspring, technology or applied science, allows us to overcome many of the problems of climatic extremes, of population, shortfall of food and water, and of religious and cultural differences, because they can be overcome. But most problems can be solved by people caring enough to care about our world. It is the only world we've got. So think about your problems, think about science. Can they come together? Well, you be the judge. Here's an example of how science and problems can be overcome. This is a submarine pipeline in a highly tidal area. It's also a rich pearl ground, fishing ground, and it has certain cultural significances. So we can't dredge it. So the first answer, the engineering answer was, oh, we'll pile rocks on it. And what happens then? You create an artificial reef that changes the whole structure. So we designed these things, which is a plastic mat that sits over the pipe and has concrete welded into it. And the concrete blocks are designed with sloping on them that allows the currents to flow over and nothing to collect and damage the pipe. You'll notice just on this corner where we don't have any of the mat, we're just laying it, you see how the stuff that's built up already just in 24 hours, just by 4 tidal changes in 24 hours. So the answers are there, but when you talk to engineers and say, well, there's an answer, oh, Jesus, we didn't learn that while we were at uni. Oh no, that's new, we don't want to know about that, no. And that is part of the problem, getting people to have an open enough mind to accept a new idea. Anyway, as I said, look at your problems and God bless you in your answers. Thank you very much.